So let's talk about the real reality of Stranger Things. As most of us know, the show has concluded its series that it had for almost 10 years, and it was done by the Duffer Brothers. And overall, the show was well put, right? Oh, there goes my neighbor. Ultimately so, the show was done well. However, the problem that a lot of these seasons had was the time span and horizon that they would film in between seasons. And many of them would be 2 to 3 year gaps. The last one being from 2022, which concluded pretty well done back then. And then they had this later season come out this year in 3 different segments, 3 different volumes. Now, me personally, I stopped watching Stranger Things until after season 3, and then season 4 and 5, I just watched different clips of it to get a gist of what was going on. I didn't really find it that appeasing anymore after season 3, although season 4 I've heard is really, really well done. But now the season is over, the franchise is still there, but the merch sales may be lessened, the hype may be gone, and people will move on within the next few months, 6 months to 12 months, right? Here's why, though, I don't care as much for Stranger Things anymore. There's a lot of people right now chirping online on how bad the Duffer Brothers did the last season and the characters, and I've heard the term queer baiting over and over and over again online within the last few days of this show concluding. And I want to take you guys back to the truth about Stranger Things. And there'll probably be a good amount of people who know about this, but there'll also be a good amount of people who do not know about this. And Stranger Things, at least in my view, is based on true events. And people are like, whoa, like, what do you mean it's based on true events? Well, have you ever heard of the Montauk Project? Probably not. A lot of people don't talk about it and don't realize that the Duffer Brothers not only drew inspiration off of, writers like Stephen King or Star Wars, George Lucas, but they drew a lot of inspiration on the fact that there was actually events going on between the 40s and the 80s of children and kids, and probably, I think, even some young adults, from what I know, were actually being experimented on by the US government at the time, but it's deemed today as a conspiracy theory, of course, because they don't want you to know the truth about what they were trying to do. And just the backstory on the Montauk Project. The Montauk Project took place between the 40s and the 80s. It was later decommissioned in 1983. But it started after the 40s, after World War II. And the peak of these experiments were actually between the 50s and the 60s, being done at this lab called Camp Hero, which is now basically anybody can go to it today. It's basically an abandoned military facility that was being used when children, young adults, teenagers were being experimented on through things like telekinesis, mind control, interdimensional access to other dimensions. So, obviously in Stranger Things, it discusses wormholes being the upside down, right? And Dimension X, and then Hawkins. Well, the real life version of that was them trying to access inner dimensions that are beyond us, that are beyond space and time. So this is why I I love the actors, I love the story, I love the plot. But the problem that I have is, let's be genuine and honest here. Stranger Things took a true event and made a franchise on it to profit money and to get rich and to get famous like everybody else does, but negating the fact that this Montauk project that took place was a horrendous situation that a lot of children were placed in. And there's many people who have not many people, but there's a few people who wrote books about it because they believed they were experimented on, but they were, during the 50s and the 60s when the peak took place. This is the height of, MK Ultra, which, if any of you know what that is, it was a mind control experiment that the US government imposed on its people and its citizens during that time. Well, while that's going on, the Cold War is going on, right? And they were trying, at least for the Montauk projects, from what I understand, to create super soldiers against the Cold War, against Russia and, the countries that were fighting during that time frame. And they were trying to create like a Terminator almost, right? By using these young boys or young girls as test subjects to unlock abilities that are not regularly unlocked in the normal, 2D, 3D world that we live in. So it's kind of, to me, in a way, sickening that, these true things that took place were then franchised into a spinoff. Now, a lot of, people will say, well, that's just how things are. That's just how life is. That's how business works. That's how franchises begin. And I understand that, but the fact is, Stranger Things was able to captivate a certain class of audience, which is primarily Gen Z, right? That's in the younger generation, and there's no problem with that. But they took something and they twisted it around to make it sound like it was this, when the facts of the Montauk Project are similar but not the same. And I get it, they drew inspiration off of it. But what about all the children that were used, potentially, right? If this is a conspiracy theory, that means that it's not set in stone. But let's propose that it is true, and these children were, taken as experiments, as test subjects, and were brainwashed into thinking that they can do telekinesis, telepathy, they can move objects and items with, their mind. And, there's even a story in the book and in a documentary I, listened about Project Montauk that talks about how one of them was able to manifest a real-life monster that tried to destroy their lab and kill people and all this stuff. Again, it's hard to believe because it sounds like, a straight-up sci-fi project, right? A sci-fi movie. But let's propose that it is real and this actually did happen. And the fact that now the military base is in ruins and now it's been made as a national park over in Long Island, because that's the real Hawkins, is Long Island, actually. Long Island is where this base is, and it's at the tip of the island where there's a beach area and all that stuff. And that's where they were seeing weird things happen, including a, unknown animal or creature, if you will, that washed up on the beach that to this day no one really knows what it is. They tried to say that it was a raccoon that was waterboarded, that got, drowned, but it had a beak-like snout and claws and all this stuff. And there's a photo online from 2008 when they took this photo, and it shows the creature, washed up on the beach. It is presumed that in this lab, when the Montauk Project was in existence, that creature was created. Now, how it was created, no one necessarily knows. I mean, there's theories that, It was just artificially created by scientists that were working in that military base. And then there's the other theories that through mind control, telepathy, telekinesis, whatever you want to call it, that these test subjects were able to manifest this creature into existence and became a thing, right? Which in a way comes back full circle to Stranger Things with Dungeons and Dragons and then these creatures being manifest. So they're trying to take that and put it in that show and show you that this is possible. But I just have a problem with trying to market it and make money off of things that actually happen to people, that these poor people today, we don't really talk about them and they don't really have a say. A lot of them have died over the years because we're talking, 50, 60, so we're talking about 40 to 50 year period of when this occurred. And also the ones that are alive today, they really can't speak out or talk about it at all because it is deemed a conspiracy. But if it were to ever come out as not a non-conspiracy, people would be, kind of shaking their heads and being like, what's going on here? Kind of the last bit of this that I want to discuss is some of the things that took place in that area. So about like 1.5 miles to 2 miles away, or let's just say several miles away from Camp Hero, where that base is, there's a small town, which presumably would be the real life Hawkins, that is around that area. And people, from what I read, were experiencing weird jumps in time, and people were acting a little strange than usual when these experiments were going on. And over that, few decades, people were just coming out kind of strange, right? Literally strange. They didn't remember things, or there was just weird, like almost supernatural occurrences that were happening during those experiments, during that time frame in that area of Long Island. And to this day, again, you can go visit that area. You can even probably talk to any people in that neighboring town, see if they know anything. But it's just something to take into consideration. Like, I get it. Everybody's really mad about how the ending of Stranger Things season 5 went. I saw clips of it again because, again, I'm not a huge fan of Stranger Things. But I'm a fan enough to be like, well, I watched the 3 seasons so back then and I enjoyed them, while they lasted. But just know and realize that the real reality is that, these people are profiting off of true events that happen to people you and I will not even see, right? You and I will never get to talk to these people who are experimented on potentially and suffered immense trauma and, probably memory issues, because when you're being hypnotized, brainwashed, told to use your mind in a certain fashion or way, by manipulators, I mean, who knows? And I just think that there needs to be more of a discussion on where Stranger Things actually originates from, because I don't want to say we should pay homage, but like, we should respect the lives that were affected by the people who were being experimented on, if this is like a true thing that really happened, right? And I think it personally did happen, because there's so much evidence pointing that it did. I mean, you can go on YouTube today and type up Montauk Project, Camp Hero, and there's actually people who have gone with GoPros inside of the freaking military base and around the base and showed you kind of what they had in there. And I mean, it shows how in ruins it is today. It's just sitting there today. And it has this big like satellite looking thing that apparently they had used to try to, again, bypass space and time, use certain things for mind control. I mean, all this stuff. So this is, I think, for everyone to have a reflection on, like, I get it, you're really pissed about the franchise, but at the same time, reflect on the true people who actually had to go through some of these things potentially during that time period, and figure out if, you really care that much about it, or do you really care more about the people who it actually affected? And a lot of people, again, are going to say, well, it's just a franchise, it's just made up, it's just this and that. It's not made up. It's based on true events that actually took place many decades ago. Almost half a century ago, I should say, or a little over that. So just reflect on it, just take something from it, and hopefully this was insightful and helped you guys in any way. Anyway, I'm going to be out. I'll talk to you guys next time. Peace.